What's up? It's the Deck Talking Devil back with you guys again. Today, I want to do another video, probably a shorter video, about what led me to leave Christianity as a pastor and become the Deck Talking Devil. But before I do that, I want you guys to go ahead, hit that like button, share, subscribe, turn on those notifications so the next time there's a new video, you'll be the first to know. Well, this has got to be one of the most asked questions, uh, not just on this platform, but on Facebook, in person, and when I'm interacting with individuals on the app called Clubhouse. Uh, I get asked this question a lot. What led you to walk away from your faith and become the Deck Talking Devil? Well, I'm glad you asked. And I can't really say that it's one thing. I feel a lot of times when I'm asked this question, it seems like the person asking the question is expecting a one-line answer. Something very short and concise, one or two things that led me away. And that's not the case at all. And I actually believe that if you're able to be led away from a position based on one thing, you probably didn't hold to that position in the first place. More than likely, you were never fully devoted, never really committed to the ideal. So, with my long standing in Christianity, there was no way one individual thing would lead me away. What it was a massive accumulation of things. Some things small, some things very large. Some things minor, some things very significant. And it was the totality of these things that caused me to realize that my belief as a Christian was an untenable position. Okay, so I had to walk away. And so maybe the next question is, what sorts of things? Name some of the things that led you away. And I think I can do that with relative ease. First, I want to introduce you to something that's called my bank code. Yes, my bank code. Not the financial institution that I bank with. But there's something called a bank code that I had to get for work. So it was a part of my job while I was instructed to go to this website and complete this. It's not a survey, but this exercise where you had to prioritize different things, and then it created, based on your prioritization of the lists that it gave you, it created what's called a bank code. This bank code kind of goes in depth. It analyzes what your personality traits are and how you interact in relationships and with the world at large. And so my bank code was KBNA. KBNA. And that K is basically knowledge. The first and highest priority on my list is knowledge. Okay, and with that bank code, the very first assessment that this algorithm extracted for me says that I value logic and reason above everything else. Now, this bank code has nothing to do with religion. I got this bank code years after I had already left religion, but I was astonished at how accurate it was describing me. I value knowledge and reason above all else. And that is one of the main things that led me away. when I stepped back and I looked at my beliefs logically, there had always been some conflict there. That it had always been uh, reasonable doubt with a lot of the things that I was asked to believe as a Christian. You know, did I really believe that when Jesus died, all the graves in Jerusalem opened and the dead got up and went home? Did I really believe that? Uh, because logically, it didn't make sense. Did I really believe the flood story? You know, did I really believe the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? It was several things in there that logically I wrestled with. Some simple things that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, you know, take no thought for tomorrow's troubles are sufficient in themselves. And like, hold on, take no thought for tomorrow? Logically, that makes no sense. That's not how a people or a species evolve. That's not how you survive, by not thinking about tomorrow. You know, I'm just worried about today and that's it. No foresight, no look into the future. And actually, in one of the assessments on my bank code, it says that you focus on long-term results with projections far into the future. This is true. uh, so logically, there were some things with what I believe that I wrestled with. And for me, logic and reason is above all else. So I had to step back, reevaluate my position, look into what I believed in. I often tell of the time where I sat down to witness, to minister to an older guy, an older black guy, and you know, he seemed to be distraught over something, bothered, like it was a lot on his mind, like he was carrying a weight. And so I interacted with the individual, and during the course of me ministering to him, he asked me the question: if we were not Christians before slavery, then who were we praying to? If we were not Christians, and I believe he said, or Muslims before slavery, then who were we praying to? And this was a question that I honestly could not answer. I had never thought about it. And so I stepped back to say, okay, if the people who were kidnapped, forcefully, stolen from their homeland, forcefully, murdered, massacred, uh, if these people were not Christians and Christianity was an effect of slavery, then who were they praying to? What religions did they have before Christianity and Islam? And so it caused me to go back and start looking into those people. And that journey took me all over the place, because I started from present day and I worked my way back. You know, I looked at uh, the current times. I looked back at civil rights movement. I looked back at during the times of slavery. I looked back during the Pan-African movement. All of these different movements, it led me to like the Nation of Islam. It led me to the Moorish Science Temple of America. Characters like Fard Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, of course, Louis Farrakhan, Khalid Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali. It led me to Marcus Garvey. All of these different characters and their different ideologies and what religious theology was at the core of what they believed. And each one of them would mention different people, you know, Dr. York. I know for some of you guys, mentioning Dr. York is like taboo. Dr. York was the leader of what was called the Nawabians. Uh, And I started looking at all the information they were putting out, and it kept forcing me to go back and research different subjects and things. And then I started looking into the different religions that people in Africa had prior to slavery, religions like Ifa, religions. I started looking at even the religions that were birthed during the diaspora, like Palomayombe, like Candomblé, Santeria, uh, Sansa, Espiritismo, all of these different religions that came out of the slave trade, as the Africans were forced into these different geographical regions, they took parts of their spirituality with them. And even in some cases, like in the case of Palomayombe, they merged these religions with the religions of the native people of the lands where they went. And so you get this plethora, this wide variety of Africanized spiritual systems all over the world. And those religious systems, those spiritual systems, those ways of life were vastly different than religion in the West. And it was an attraction there to those religions because it was free of dogma. And yeah, some are kind of similar in certain ways. Like Ifa, for instance, is more of a rigid religion than something like Palomayombe, which is more of a system of rituals that are carried out without the theology. There's no book. There's no rhetoric, really. There's no tenets to uphold. It's really a system of rituals that have been performed by people for centuries. And so all of them were really tied to nature. In every system, they were tied to nature. Deities or spirits, orishas, gods, if you would, of different nature elements, like river gods or river deities, deities of thunder and lightning, fire, deities of oceans and fresh water, all kinds of deities and figures that were interwoven into the fabric of these different religions. And this was vastly different from this one Godhead, Jehovah, who really wasn't tied to nature. So it was different, it was attractive, and I looked into it. I researched. I did my due diligence in researching some of the thinking, the ideologies behind these different religious concepts and these different spiritual systems. And I was impressed. I saw within those systems what preceded Christianity and Islam. I saw within those systems tenets in some that seemed to predate Christianity and Islam. And it was very easy in some of the stories to see where some of the stories in the Bible originated from. And this led me to the next thing. Like, things in the Bible seem to be copied from other sources. But yet within the biblical text, there's never any credence given to those sources. And so one thing that I value highly is authenticity. If you use someone else's stuff, at least give them credit and say, this is the source of the information that I'm disseminating. But that's never done in the Christian text, in the biblical text, in the Jewish text. It's never done. And I had a problem with that because not doing that seemed to be dishonest to me. Very dishonest. And now I'm having to come to grips with the reality that the people who wrote the Bible took credit for material that was not theirs to take credit of. And not even that, but they gave the credit to their God and not to the people from whom the text had originally come. And this was very troubling for me because it seemed as if we were being told, do as I say, not as I do. Because all throughout the Christian text, we're being told about honesty and truthfulness. The truth shall set you free. A liar shall not tarry in the sight of God. We're always being warned against deceit and cunningness and craftiness. But here it seemed very blatant that the writers, the authors of the biblical text, were themselves practicing deceit. Is the story of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus original to the biblical text? It's the story of the Holy Trinity, original to the biblical text. It's the story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead, original to the biblical text. It's the story of Noah's flood, original to the biblical text. The story of the creation, is it original to the biblical text? The answer to each one of these is no. And this is what I found through all of the research that I'd done, that I could find accounts of these stories that precedes their appearance in the biblical text. But not once in the biblical text does the author say that these stories came from these different places. They present the stories as if it's original and authentic to them. Now, could there have been an author in the Bible who wrote a story that was popular in his region and he didn't really know where it originated? That's very possible. Could someone had regurgitated a story that they'd heard somewhere and subconsciously maybe they kind of perceived this to have happened in their lifetime, or they presented the information as if they were witnesses to it, when in fact it was a story that had been around for ages. It's possible. But that does nothing to the fact that these stories existed before the Bible. And for me, that was a problem. Because now I'm put in a position, what we would call a strategic inflection point, where I'm having to make a decision on which way to go. Because on the one hand, I got all the stories that I had been raised on, the parables, the teachings, the tenets, the commandments, the laws that I had been raised on. And I had been taught my whole life that they were authentic. They were the infallible word of God, that every word from Genesis to Revelation was true and exact and without flaw, without error. This is how I was raised. Now, every Christian's not raised that way, so I don't want to heap them all into one category. Everyone's not raised that way. But in my particular denomination, Church of God in Christ, I was raised to believe that the Bible was the infallible word of God. It was to be believed as true from beginning to the end. All right, this is how I was taught. And so now I'm seeing evidence that suggests that this is not true. Overwhelming evidence that suggests that this was not true. And so I start to doubt a little more. Starts to push me, to repel me away from Christianity. Now I'm not holding on to it as tight as I once was. because there's evidence that's starting to mount on the side contrary to what I believed. Then I got into what's called textual criticism. And for me, textual criticism was probably the nail in the coffin. It really finalized my decision when I got into textual criticism. Textual criticism is analyzing the text of the Bible and critically analyzing the text of the Bible. You're looking at sources, you're looking at dates, you're looking for things that are anachronistic, you're looking at contradictions, you're looking at changes, modifications in the text due to translations, and all of these different things. You're looking at a wide array of things to determine the authenticity of the text to the original. And mind you, we have no originals for any text in the Bible. That in itself, for me, was astonishing because I didn't know. We have no originals of any text in the Bible. All right. And I want to say that there's like 7,500 manuscripts that are of New Testament manuscripts, copies, and they range over a bunch of different centuries, but primarily around the 8th and 9th century is where you get about 95% of your text from. Now, we're talking about 800 years after the fact. This is where 95% of your text come from. A very small, minuscule amount of text come from the 1st century. You get into things like P45 and these different scraps that were found of different texts that's dated earlier. But we had no originals. And so now it raises the question, how do we know what the original text said? We have no way of knowing. And I think what was more of a daunting task for me to try to overcome was the fact that for the Gospels, we didn't know who wrote them. This may not even register on somebody's radar. But for me, this was mind-blowing. Like, you're telling me that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not write Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we don't even know who did. So it's not just that those guys didn't write it. We have no idea who did. For me, that was massive. That was huge. But text criticism, because it's more of a scientific methodology, if you would, it's a rigorous approach to scrutinizing the text. And for me, somebody with my bank code, that's really big. You know, to be able to get it down to a scientific methodology, analyzing the text, fact checking, cross-referencing, looking at different manuscripts, datings, and all of these things, this really resonated with me. Now, for people with a different approach, different bank code even, this may not be big at all for you. You may say, that's, you know, if you lost your religion over that, then you're lost, you know, you were misled. Well, remember, keep in mind, this is not the only thing. Matter of fact, this was probably the last thing. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. This was not even the first thing that caused me to start doubt. It was all of these other things, just questions that caused me to start researching stuff. And the more I researched, the more stuff I discovered. And mind you, Let me clear this up. Because I was not researching these things in order to leave. What I thought I was going to do was be able to research them and prove them wrong. I was trying to prove Christianity to be true. That was my intention on doing the research. That, yes, I'm open-minded. I'm willing to look into this information, but I was confident that at the end of the day, my faith would not be shaken. I would not be moved off of the solid rock that was my faith in Jesus Christ. I was confident of that fact. So I didn't care about researching and looking into different things because I just knew that at the end of the day, I would be right back at the foot of the cross. That didn't happen. As much as I wanted it to happen, as much as I prayed for it to happen, it did not happen. There was no overcoming the things that I found out. That there was no way I could justify logically and reasonably. I could not justify ignoring the massive amount of evidence against what I had once believed. And, you know, you go even further into things like stratigraphy and what it tells us about whether or not there was ever a global flood. You go into the different radiometric and carbon dating and things like that, talking about the age of the earth versus what the biblical text suggests. Even into the statistics, the sheer number of errors, variants, that's what they call them in text criticism, different variances that are in the biblical text, that there's more variances in the New Testament than there are words in the New Testament. Bart Ehrman says that all the time, and people like Dan Wallace and Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman will admit or concede the fact that most of those variances are insignificant and does nothing to affect the theology and doctrine of the Christian text. However, there are some that are major. Some of them are major, like the Johannine comma. Like the adultery pericope or pericope adultery. The woman called it an adultery. Different things like that that are absolutely essential really has a big impact on the text that we call the Bible. So these things for me really led me to have to take the position that I cannot, with a sound mind, hold to these beliefs any longer. I couldn't justify still believing it despite the evidence. You know, it's not who I am. It's not the type of person I am. I have to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Now, if at some point evidence is presented to counteract the evidence that I saw that made the case against Christianity, then I definitely will follow the evidence. But on my journey to try to verify and validate the biblical text and the Christian position, I was unable to do so. And the arguments and evidence against my position were overwhelming. So much so that my position was deemed untenable. I could no longer hold it. And so for me, that was enough. And I get asked all the time, well, how much research did you do? I researched this for 3 years. 3 years before I made a decision. So I started small, you know, just looking into different stuff, like the Nation of Islam, what were they all about? Why did they have so much influence during the time that they did? Dr. King's theology and stuff, Mahatma Gandhi and things like this. So I started pretty small, contemporary, and then I started going a bit further back because each one of these individuals had teachers who had teachers, and I started going back, tracing the ideologies and philosophical and religious perspectives to the sources and doing a deep dive. And that took some time. It took me 3 years to come to a conclusion. The reason it took so long is because I did not want to let go of my religion, of my belief. You got to look at this. I was not just a Christian. I was a pastor. Like, I had a congregation. I had family members who were members of my congregation. The risk for me were through the roof. This really, I was laying it all on the line. To make the decision that I did, I had no incentive. All right. If anything, the incentive was for me to hold to my position, to my faith, to remain a Christian. Most of my family, most of my friends, everybody, most of the people that I knew in my world were Christian. And they knew that I was a Christian pastor, that I had been in ministry since I was 15. They knew it. And so for me to make this decision caused me to lose a lot of friends, some family. It soured relationships. And so I had no incentive. That was nothing for me to gain on the other side. There was nothing luring me away. I didn't benefit materially or financially or anything from leaving Christianity. So you bet your bottom dollar that I really invested myself in research, and it's behind me. This library I started amassing this because of my initial research, the initial questions that I was asking. I started to look into these different subjects, and so there was no cost that was too expensive for me to spend on research because it was that important to me. I had to get the truth. I had to. And I was not going to stop until I did. And after all of this research, I had to acknowledge that my position was not the right one. And so I stopped being a Christian. I stopped believing in the Christian God. And so I'm often asked, am I an atheist? I am, in a sense. So I operate from the working definition for atheists. So whenever you hear me say atheist, this is what I mean. I don't mean what you mean. Okay, so don't hold me to your definition of atheist. My definition of atheist is someone who does not accept the argument or the statement or the existence of the God of Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. All right, the main three religions. Somebody who does not believe that God or those gods exist. And so I do not believe that the God of the Bible exists. It's not just that I don't believe in him. I don't believe he exists. However, because I'm not convinced that he doesn't exist, does not mean that I said he does not. Different statement. If you watch Matt Dillahunty makes this point quite often. All right, and I agree, he is correct. because I'm saying that the God of the Bible, I haven't been presented with enough evidence to believe that this God exists, then I'm not stating that he does not exist. It's quite different. All right. I don't believe he exists. I don't. I've been presented with a lot of arguments over the years where people try to convince me that he does exist, and none of those arguments so far have been convincing to me. So, when asked, am I an atheist? Yes, towards some gods. I'm not convinced that there are no gods, right? But there are certain gods that I'm convinced don't exist. So hopefully that makes sense. You know, I don't believe the God of the Bible exists. Don't believe it. So if you have an argument for it, let me know in the comment section what your argument for that belief is and why I should believe it. But I just wanted to kind of redo this video because I made a video probably a year ago now talking about what led me from Christianity to the position that I hold today, and that question continually comes up. So I figured I'd do another video, kind of maybe I hit on some stuff in this video that I didn't touch on in the last one. But whatever the case, there you have it. So, are you a Christian? I'd like to know from the people who subscribe to my channel, and even those who are not subscribed yet because they're doing it now. I like to know from you, are you a Christian, or what's your belief? What's your position on belief in God? I'd like to know in the comment section below. Now, I would say, just because this is a very sensitive subject, so I don't want anybody God bashing in the comment section. Don't come on here and start bashing people's God and things of that nature. One thing that I say all the time is, in my opinion, religion is a vehicle whose purpose is to take people to God. And if you disable their vehicle, if you attack their religion, dismantle their religion, then you had better have something else to substitute to get them to God. Otherwise, you're liable for leaving them stranded on that journey. So if you attack Christianity and you dismantle Christianity, then you should have an alternative available for people to help them on their journey. And I'm not saying necessarily another God belief, but you should have an alternative philosophical concept or something to fill that void. Because if you take God out of some people's lives, you've left a massive hole, and you have to equip them to fill that hole, to fill that void. I think it's just a responsible thing to do. So I tear Christianity to shreds all the time. You know, I dismantle it. I think there should be global Bible burning session. You know, and I'm not saying do away with the Bible because it's just a piece of junk. I think some of the literature in the Bible is masterfully written. I think some of the texts, as far as us preserving it for history's sake, you know, for progeny's sake, for them to be able to look back on this text that held so much sway over so many people for so long, I think it's worth preserving for those reasons. But as a text that dictates to people how they should live their lives, as a text that's claimed to be sacred and holy, I think it's a worthless piece of shit. It's garbage. It's immoral. It contradicts itself. It's ambiguous. It's so much that's not good. So I'm not saying there's nothing good in it and it's nothing worth preserving, but it does have some immoral things in it. Very immoral things that are in there. And I think that if you took the Bible away, wiped it off the face of the earth, I don't think the world would get 1% worse. Like, I really don't think that the biblical text contributes to the morality of the world at all. One iota. If anything, I think it's detrimental and counterproductive to morality. It's my thoughts. But I'd like to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Try to be diplomatic in your comments. Try to be clear and concise and set emotion aside. Okay? Because this subject arouses so much passion and vigor and fervor in people, sometimes it's hard to get emotions out of the way to clearly communicate what it is you're trying to say. So, take a deep breath and type. And when you type, read what you've typed. Does it make sense to you? Would you be offended had somebody said it to you? And if so, you may want to tweak it. You may want to change some stuff. Don't. If you come for a throttle, I'm coming back. When shots fired, I shoot back. So that energy that you putting into that comment right now, that energy, you keep that same energy and remember it when I shoot back. All right. I recommend you be diplomatic, you be sensible, you be rational, you be civil, and let's have a conversation about it. Do you think I was justified in leaving Christianity and religion as a whole? Do you think it should have been more research? What do you think about my path to where I am today? And would you be willing to do the same thing? I'll do another video because I always get asked the question, what books should I read if I'm just starting this journey? If I want to start looking into religion and these things that you're talking about, what sources can I turn to get started on that journey? So I'll be doing another video where I address that, and it will be a shorter video, probably about 10 minutes. And I'll post that so that you guys will have those sources, because that's another question I get quite often, is what books would I recommend for somebody trying to get started on this journey? And there's a lot of them, and books aren't the only sources. There's scientific articles and websites and things that you can turn to, different organizations and stuff that has a lot of good information that you would need to go through. And I always say, look at the evidence and let the evidence lead you. Don't lead the evidence. This was something that archaeologists was quite prone to doing, in the early days of biblical archaeology. They'd start with these presuppositions. They'd start with the text of the Bible, and let the conclusion lead them to the evidence to justify it. And that's not the way that you do research. That should never be your methodology. So, and we'll get into things like methodology, epistemology, theology, and all of that stuff at another time. I wanted to do this video just kind of refresh this and bring this subject back to the forefront for those of you who are curious. So there you have it, another long video. Hopefully something was said in here to spark interest or conversation. This has been the Deck Talking Devil. Hit that like button, share, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So the next time there's a new video, you'll be the first to know. Until next time, keep learning, my friend.